Well, howdy there, folks. Wait a minute. Y'all are Dallas Lawson and Dusty Cooper, aren't ya? You two escaping from Rowdy Town is all this town's a-talking about. Oh my, I seem to have forgotten my manners. I'm Miss Charlotte Eau Claire, one of the journalists for the Whistle Creek Times. I'm covering all the shenanigans happening back in your town, and I'm just so glad you two were able to get away from that scoundrel of a mayor in time. The whole thing reminds me of one of my favorite stories from the Bible about a man named Moses. You two just have to hear it. God's people, the Israelites, were living in Egypt as slaves. Sun up to sundown, the mean old Pharaoh put them to work each and every day. Even though they were downright miserable, God never left them. He knew they needed help and sent Moses and Aaron to lead them to the promised land. Moses and Aaron listened to God and went to Pharaoh to tell him that it was time to let God's people go. Pharaoh didn't care. He liked having slaves around doing all the work for him, so he refused to hear what they had to say. Moses didn't know what to do, so he prayed and asked for help. God reminded Moses that he would never leave him and that he would save his people. God told Moses and Aaron to go talk to Pharaoh again. So that's exactly what they did. They said, "Let God's people go." But Pharaoh's answer was still the same, a big N-O. God told Moses and Aaron that Pharaoh would ask them to perform a miracle. So Aaron took his walking stick, threw it down on the ground, and it turned into a mean old snake. That didn't bother Pharaoh none. He still refused to obey God's command to let his people go. It was time for some drastic measures. Moses then met Pharaoh at the Nile River and asked him one more time to let God's people go. But wouldn't you know it, he still didn't listen. So God told Moses that Aaron should use the walking stick to strike the river. And when he did, it turned right into blood. You'd think that would be enough to convince Pharaoh, but no sirree. That Pharaoh stayed stubborn and refused to let God's people go. God had Moses try to convince Pharaoh 9 more times. To prove that he was for his people, God brought punishment on Pharaoh and the Egyptians, and boy, they sure did suffer. Picture this. God sent thousands of frogs, hippity-hopping all over town, the whole place smelling worse than an old boot. Then swarms of gnats and flies buzzing around everyone's head. It didn't get better from there either. I'm talking animals dying left and right, boils all over their skin, hail falling from the sky, locusts flying all around, darkness for days, and by golly, even death. Now, the whole time this was happening, the Israelites were just waiting and wondering when they would be set free. They knew that God hadn't left them, and that one fine day they would see the promised land. After all this crazy mess, Pharaoh had finally had enough, and he let God's people go. As they were heading out of town, God sent a cloud to lead them by day and a fire to lead them by night. God had never left them while they were in Egypt, and he would never leave them on their long journey to the promised land. Now that's my favorite kind of story to be reporting. You know, just like God never left the Israelites, he sure isn't gonna leave us either. I wish I could stay and chat, but I'm running late for an interview for a story I'm working on. Now enjoy your stay, and don't forget to try Whistle Creek's famous frog leg stew before you head on your way.